Hi, welcome back to Horror Recapped. Today we're going to explore 2009's The Fourth Kind. Beware, spoilers ahead. Watch out and take care. We begin our film by meeting Abby as she introduces herself as Mila Jovovich. She tells us that what we're about to witness is a dramatization of a real-life event in Alaska. This movie has real-life footage prepared throughout, and the names of the people have been changed to protect them. We start off with an interview with a real-life Abby, and she tells her interviewer about how she had trouble dealing with the loss of her husband. We go further back to see when Abby goes to see her psychiatrist, Dr. Abel, and he tells her that her and her daughter are having the same problems. Abby thinks that finding the man that's responsible for her husband's death will help bring her closure. Once Dr. Abel sets up the camera, he tries to coach her into a deep sleep. Now that she's asleep, he takes her back in time to the night of the attack. He walks her through what the weather was like, and he takes her back right before the intruder came. Abby was spending some personal time with her husband, Will, but soon after, Will falls asleep. Abby finds herself awake still, and she witnesses Will getting stabbed. Abby cries out in horror as she relives the moment, and Dr. Abel tries to tell her to look at the attacker's face. When Abby starts to lose her focus, Dr. Abel pulls her out of the trance. She tells him that she feels guilty about the fact that she can't see his face, even though she was right there when Will was killed. Dr. Abel thinks that she should take some time off, but Abby thinks she needs to continue her study. Abby then flies to the town of Nome, Alaska, and she arrives at a research facility. Abby catches up with her assistant, and she heads into her office to deal with Scott. She sits down to start their session, and she goes over the usual questions. She finds out that Scott keeps waking up around 3 a.m. for almost no reason, but he notices that there is always an owl at his window. Then, we notice that every patient Abby sees that day speaks of the same exact event. The same white owl sits outside their window at 3 a.m. for a couple of hours. All of them start to think that the owl made its way inside to look down at them somehow, but none of them can remember clearly. It almost seems as though all of the residents shared the same dream. After work, Abby drives to the school to pick up her daughter, Ashley, who went blind after Will got killed. Then, they head home, and they eat dinner with Abby's son, Ronnie. Ronnie seems to be holding Abby to a standard that she can't keep to, and he seems to blame her for what happened to Will. That night, an owl is seen perched outside of Abby's house. When we hear interview footage, we hear that Ronnie blamed Abby for what happened to Will, and he doesn't trust her to protect him and Ashley. That night, Abby listens to a recording of Will, and he is talking about the same owl circumstances and how it might be connected to disappearances in the area. The next day, Abby meets with Tommy, and she puts him in a trance. She asks him about the owl, and he tells her that it came back the night before. Suddenly, he tells her that something is outside his door, and his trance gets intense. Just then, he cries out, and he frantically gets to his feet. When he comes out of the trance, Abby tries to ask what he saw, but he denies seeing anything at all. Having had enough of this experience, Tommy asks to talk about everything tomorrow instead. That night, police respond to an emergency call to Tommy's house where gunfire is heard. Sheriff August shows up, and he makes contact with Tommy. Tommy only wants to talk to Abby, and she drives out to help. When she gets there and talks to Tommy, he tells her that he doesn't have a choice. Tommy speaks words that Abby doesn't understand, and then he shoots his family before shooting himself. After the incident, Abby goes with Sheriff August to the department, and she gives her statement on what Tommy had told her in their session. Then, August seems to put the blame on her, putting Tommy in a hypnotic state, and he tells her to stop pursuing her research in Nome before more people are killed. The next day, Abby goes to the office to find Dr. Abel waiting to check on her. He tries to talk her into taking a sabbatical, but she refuses to back off. When Abby starts her meetings, her patients think that what happened to Tommy is going to affect them. They ask her to hypnotize them as well, and Abby has Dr. Abel come in to observe while she does it. Abby finds out that her patient saw an owl the night before, but the deeper he goes into his memory, the more he realizes that it isn't a normal owl. The patient talks about how it is actually things coming in the house without setting off the alarm. These beings have been visiting ever since he was a child. She struggles to pull him out of his hypnosis, but when she does, the patient throws up in the corner. Now that he's awake, the patient coherently explains that he can't actually picture the beings, but they are not from this world. All he can describe is a putrid cinnamon smell that comes with them, and that the beings take him away to somewhere he can't remember. Abby tells them that since they did this, she's going to tell August about what they did so he can watch them. And after her patient tells her that he knows now why Tommy did what he did. After the patient leaves, Abby asks Dr. Abel if he believes in alien abductions. Suddenly, Abby's assistant comes to tell Abby that her tape from the night before is disturbing, and when Abby listens to it with Abel, she hears herself screaming as a deeper voice speaks an unknown language. That night, Abby listens to the recording over and over to try and piece some things together, and she decides to contact a Dr. Awalawa. When she thinks that this is a dead end, she hangs up on him, but he calls her back to listen to her story. After listening to what she has to say, Awoloa hops on a plane and flies over to Nome. Awoloa believes that the language spoken on the recording is Sumerian, and he translates some of what he heard. He also agrees that the voices don't sound like they are human. Dr. Abel thinks that Awoloa is speaking about inconclusive babble, but he assures them that this is all based on evidence that he has gathered over his career. Just then, the phone rings, and Abby is called to her patient's house. They find her patient, Scott, lying in bed, and he is trying to explain everything to Abby. He tells her that he has to get this out of his head, and Abby has Dr. Abel set up the camera. Abby puts him under a light trance, and she talks him through the process of remembering what happened to him. Suddenly, Scott levitates off the bed, and he starts speaking the ancient Sumerian language. Once he is out of the trance, Abby goes back home to start packing things for her and her kids. Ronnie is reluctant to help at first, but she convinces him. Just then, Ronnie spots people outside. When Abby goes to answer the door, August comes in to question Abby about what happened to Scott, because Scott now has a broken back. She tries to explain what actually happened, but August goes to arrest her. Just then, Dr. Abel shows up, and he tries to explain that he can't arrest Abby. He tries to tell August that he saw what happened, but he can't really explain it. So, August finally lets up and tells her that she is to be on house arrest 24/7. After August leaves, a deputy sits outside and starts to record the house. Later that night, a beam of light comes down and snatches Ashley. August comes back, and he tries to pry information out of Abby, but all she talks about are aliens taking Ashley. August thinks that she isn't in the right head, and he takes Ronnie from her custody and leaves her in Ashley's room to sob. Abby eventually gets up and decides that she has to come up with a way to get to the source on her own. She enlists the help of Dr. Abel and Awoloa, and they put her in a state of hypnosis. Dr. Abel asks her what happened 3 days ago when the aliens first made contact. Abby tells him that she saw the same owl her parents were seeing, but then she mentions that it wasn't an owl after all. When she goes back, she sees that there were beings that came into her room and attempted to take her. Abby put up a fight, but she was no match for the beings. She remembers that they were experimenting on her, and she remembers the pain of the back probe as it drilled into her. Suddenly, Abby levitates, and she screams out in Sumerian. She manages to speak to the beings through her hypnosis, and she cries out for them to bring Ashley back to her. The voice tells her that they'll never bring the child back, and they are actually God. When the hypnosis stops, Dr. Abel and Awoloa try to help Abby, but when the camera comes back into focus, the room is silent. Abby admits that they were all abducted, and she wakes up a couple of days later in the hospital. August is there when she wakes up, and he asks her how Will died. She tells him that Will was murdered, but August has something to show her. He shows her pictures of Will, and he shows her pictures of the gun Will used to kill himself. She still refuses to believe it, but August and Dr. Abel seem persuaded that that is all there is to it. So now, August asks Abby what really happened to Ashley. She turns to Dr. Abel and she tries to make him open up about what happened to them. He refuses though. When Abby tells August that she still thinks someone came and took Ashley, August still thinks that she's just insane. In the present day interview, Abby tries to tell him that she still believes that Ashley is with the aliens, and she is not giving up hope. We then see that the FBI has paid Nome over 2,000 visits since 1960, and we find out that everyone continued their lives. Abby was eventually cleared of all charges, including the disappearance of Ashley. Ashley has still never been found to this date. The style of mixing pure entertainment videos and found footage clips makes this movie an interesting genre mix. It's definitely unique in its execution of the footage. Thank you for watching. If you've enjoyed this recap, don't forget to like and subscribe with the notifications turned on so you don't miss a single video.